Hi there. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to work with the XR socket interactables. Building on what we did before with XR simple interactables and grab interactables, this is sort of the next step up in terms of complication. And the point of it is that we are going to work in this tutorial series toward making a VR escape room. To do that, I build a little room for us to escape from. If you wanted to, you could probably add Pro Builder to this and build yourself a room that's a little better than this one. But I just made a bunch of cubes. These are all cubes childed under an object that I called room. So all these walls and ceilings and everything are just cubes. And then I put a door in to lock us in. There'll be doors on both sides that will end up doing a little bit of scripting to make appear. But just for our purposes right now, I'm going to concentrate on this section. Eventually, there'll be a couple of steps. We'll hit a button and it'll make a crystal appear. The crystal will need to be put into this fire, which will light on fire, and then that'll create another button and that'll let us out. But right now, we're just going to look at the crystal and its socket. Okay? So we'll turn the crystal on, which again the button will eventually do, but for right now we'll just turn it on. And we will also, just for the sake of showing you, that's what we're going to try to accomplish, is that once the crystal goes in here, we make the crystal burn and disappear and the particles start. Okay, here's how you start. Now we are ready to make this crystal into the key in our socket key relationship here. So we want this thing to be a grab interactable so that we can grab it and walk it over to the socket. So remember from last time, we just add a grab interactable component, which brings in a rigid body component as well. Now, we also don't want this thing to just fall out of the sky onto the table when we instantiate it or when we spawn it. So we're going to turn it on is kinematic, but I don't particularly need it to fall out of my hand when I let go of it or make it throwable because I actually don't want to lose it. So I'm not going to worry about turning off is kinematic when we let go for now. It'll just be kind of a magic floating crystal in this case. Okay, so when, for now, this is all we really need. We're going to be able to pick this thing up. We can add a little more fun to it later, but for now, that's all we need to do with it. So then that brings us to the socket, and that's over here. This is a brazier, like a low poly model that I grabbed for free from the asset store, and it comes with like a particle system, sort of like pixelated green fire that burns. So what my goal is we're gonna put this crystal into the fire and then that'll light on fire, and it's also gonna create one last button for us to press, and that button will let us out of this room. Okay, so we need a socket on this brazier. So what I'm going to do is right click on the brazier and I'm going to create a 3D object cube. And so this is a childed cube. I'm going to rename it socket, and I'm going to position it about where I would like this this socket to live. So right now this is a cube that we can see, but if we turn off its mesh renderer, it's really just a box collider. And you could just make an empty object and add a box collider to it, but I just decided to start with a cube so that I could visualize it. And that way, if we need to turn this back on or or we could potentially change its material and like be able to see the socket a little bit. That way we have a mesh renderer all ready to go. Okay, next thing I want to make sure of is the box collider should be set to a trigger. And in case you don't know what that does, a collider that's not a trigger is sort of like a wall. It keeps things out, you know. But a trigger can be passed through, but it still passes information about collisions to Unity. So Unity is going to know when something collides with this box, it's just not going to stop it from going through. And that's the kind of effect we want for a socket. Okay, so now we can add component, and we're going to do XR socket interactor. And the way socket interactor works is anything that goes in this then affects the select of the interactor events here. So if we put our crystal into this and let go, that'll count as a select. If we just put the crystal in and kind of wave it around without letting go, that's what counts as a hover. So far so good. We could test this out now and just see what the effect looks like. And now I have my crystal. Oh, but I can't pick it up. Let's go figure out why I can't pick it up. So the one thing that we need on this object that we don't have is a collider. And the reason we don't have one is because this isn't just a cube or a sphere or something we generated from Unity. This too is something from the asset store. And it doesn't come with its own collider. So colliders can be as simple as a box or a sphere, and that would honestly probably do fine in this case. But just in case you don't know, there is the option to make a mesh collider, and I'll show you that now. So a mesh collider uses the exact shape of this wireframe mesh as the shape of the collider. And that's cool, but it can be a problem for performance if there's lots and lots and lots of complicated mesh colliders. But in this case, there's one more step that I'd like to do. I want to set this mesh collider to be convex. And what that means is where you couldn't really see the wireframe before because it was the literal exact wireframe of this crystal, convex wireframe or a convex mesh collider makes an attempt to just sort of outline the outside of the object with polygons. So there's no holes or things that sort of turn in on themselves. And so now we've got kind of like a general low poly gem-like outline around this object. And that will be our collider. In this case, I don't think we need it to be a trigger. I think we would like this to be solid. So we're going to hit play once again. And now we should be able to pick up our gem. All right, we got it. Take note that like last time with the cylinder we made, the attach transform is not particularly great on this crystal. We're sort of grabbing it where there's nothing to grab. So we could add a child object to this crystal and get a better looking attach transform. But if we bring it over here, check that out. That's the socket interactor working already. So when we hover, it shows us a transparent model of the thing that we are socketing in there. And if we let go, it jumps to that position. We can also pull it back out again. Now, for right now, that's all it does. We haven't hooked up any events, interactor events with it, but the socket already works. But a problem that we have is if I create another grab interactable, this also works. In fact, any grab interactable would socket into this brazier, which is pretty cool that it works automatically, but is not so cool from a game design perspective if you want them to use a certain key, but you have more than one grab interactable in your game. They could just use any grab interactable as a key. So we need to fix that. So here's our socket interactor again. And the first thing we're going to fix is the ability for any grab interactable to socket in here. And you do that with the interaction layer mask. So like we learned with teleporting, the XR Interactable Toolkit has these layer masks for XR interaction. And right now, this socket interactor is set to interact with everything. So everything and default and teleport, it'll take anything. So that's not how we want this to function. In fact, we would like it to only interact with one particular key object. So I'm going to add a layer, and I'm going to call that layer key. I guess I could call it crystal, but just in case I want to be general, or I want to switch the model to a key later or whatever, I'm just going to call this a key. And now when I go, instead of everything, I want to use key. But remember that the way these pull downs work is if I were to just click key, that actually just takes key away. So we're going to start by clicking nothing and then choosing key. So now it can only interact with the key, and the other side of that setting is that we need to make this thing be a key. So this grab interactable should not be a default. We're going to do nothing, and we're going to make it a key. Whereas this thing is going to remain a default. And let's test. So here is our capsule. We try to put it in, and it doesn't work. But here, what's happened now? We can't interact with our crystal. So, solved one problem but created another, right? Because by changing the interaction layer of the crystal, we weren't able to interact with it any longer. So now we need to put an interaction layer setting on our hands. So on each hand in the complete XR origin setup, there are interactors, poke interactors, direct interactors, ray, teleport, etc. In this case, I happen to be using the direct interactor, and its interaction layer mask is default. But I want it to be able to interact with more than just default. So I'm going to add another thing, key. I could potentially do everything, but there might be times when I don't want it to interact depending on what I'm going to be using these layer masks for. So I should do this to each hand, the direct interactor under each hand. And if you were using ray interactors, you should do it to those as well. Just so happens in this game, I set it up to only take direct interaction with no rays. So now I can pick up my crystal again, and I can socket it in here, but I still cannot socket my capsule. All right, we got the effect we intended. The only thing left to do now is make this socket actually do something once we socket. So I'm going to go back to our socket, and now we're going to go down to our select entered. And in this case, what I want it to do is turn on the last button that's going to let us out of our doors. So we have a button childed over here under this third yellow cube. So I'm going to drag it over here, and under game object, I'm going to use set active and say yes. So now, grab my crystal, socket it in, and find a button that was never there before. Okay, so that's how socket interactors work. A little more complicated than some of the other interactors because there's, especially if you want to limit the things that go into them, you get involved in layer masks and things like that. But that's basically the principle. Now, in terms of like cool game design, I wouldn't want to stop there. So here, for example, is the particle system that makes the fire that comes out of this brazier. So I'd like that to turn on when we throw the crystal into the socket. So let's make this particle system active and we'll have it play. But then I'm going to turn off play on awake. So that way, in the socket, when select becomes entered, we're going to throw the particle system in here. And then in particle system, we're going to hit play. All right. Very cool. It works.